And what else? I think now it's about time I give up, or I give the word to Daria and Matthias, but let me quickly introduce them to you. So Matthias Gommel is an associated artist at the ZKM and founding member of the Karlsruhe-based artist group called Robot Lab. He's an exhibition designer and was involved in numerous exhibitions at the ZKM. He also created the scenography for the exhibition Critical Zones, Observatories for Earthly Politics. Daria Mille is a curator and research associate at the Curatorial department of the ZKM. Her research interests focus on the intersection of art, science, and technology, as well as cultural and artistic implications of digitalization. Most recently, she's been member of the Curatorial committee of the Critical Zones exhibition in Karlsruhe. And with that, I hand over the word.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'd like to start the introduction towards terrestrial practices in exhibition making is our title. The situation of ecological crisis suggests that caring about the environment is a natural extension of museums' primary role of collecting and caring about cultural objects. Still, we observe here a conflicting situation between the internal museum environment and the health of the global environment. Practices of art institutions based on vast material accumulation and expansion, high energy consumption due to maintaining customary museum standards of temperature and humidity, massive logistics and production of new artworks have a significant negative impact on the environment. If not for the virus, the statistics trends in 2019 were showing increasing CO2 emissions also in the cultural sector, despite individual and public recognition of the need for a change. There is a lack of agreement between the museums or concrete action plans to get out of this situation. A lot of indicators are showing that we're stuck and something impedes taking action. How to get active? What is lacking to start getting things moved? Can we start to act ourselves, or do we need empowerment? How to enable this action? How to change our working practice? What is to be done?
And if we accept the methodology of Bruno Latour, then the first step would be a self-description and an understanding of what forms and influences our material practices, and also describing and questioning standards and routines we are in the art world. For example, which materials of an exhibition can be reused, what our paint is made of that we paint the walls with, why we see in the most of art galleries a situation of a white cube where there are no windows or they should remain closed. How does it influence our CO2 footprint? Why do we have a constant temperature and humidity control in the exhibition space and block sunlight? And a slight change of a perspective and in our sensorium will be enough to see that the idea of a museum as a perfect neutralized space is at odds with the exhibition production that doesn't happen isolated from the world. Our activities, in this case, for example, exhibition production, are depending on activities and networks, not only of other humans, but also on biogeochemical cycles happening in the critical zone or in nature, on the work and on life of other life forms as plants, bacteria, and animals acting on different timescales and providing resources and materials for our operating systems. For example, bacteria accumulate iron over billions of years. Otherwise, it would have been scattered as it is on Mars. And we use it afterwards without questioning even this fact. We just take it as granted that it is there. And this shift in the perspective could be one of the first steps that Bruno Latour calls becoming terrestrial and understanding codependencies forming our material subsistence and our material thriving. There is, by the way, a lecture also of Bruno Latour in the Terrestrial University on this topic of becoming terrestrial. If you're interested, probably somebody can post the link into the chat. I would like to draw your attention that today is the Earth Day. And on the site of the educational campaign of the German Committee of the Earth Day, I found a really nice quotation. Only knowledge about the interrelationships of all life gives the will to the chance to act. So there are many small steps and everyone can take them. So how can exhibitions pick up this impulse and develop a narrative of responsibility towards the planet being part of a new culture? And how at the same time they can participate or doing this through establishing new sustainable practices in material, energy, and transport and travel. So in this panel, we would like to explore how art institutions can become self-critical, make first steps in questioning and improving their material practices. So there are a lot of hands-on, I think, stuff in this section, and also how practitioners and designers and artists can inspire a change in this field, and also what barriers and difficulties there might be on the way. And we are moderating this panel together, me and Matthias, because we thought that also having different perspective on this matter would be also fruitful. So we are super pleased to welcome our guests today, who will briefly introduce right now. Today is Graciela Milicka-Thornton with us. Graciela, your Creative Green program at Julie's Bicycle, and you focus on consultancy support for cultural organizations in all sectors. You have been developing policy and delivering projects for low carbon cities, environmental management, and as well as the promotion of renewable energy. Today with us is also Janina Prudenko and Alexei Shulgin, who will speak with us from Moscow. Janina is a researcher and curator, as well as an eco-blogger, and Alexei is an artist and curator. Together, they are co-authors of Art Footprint Manifesto, as well as organizers of an online Art Footprint conference in 2020. Then we are also very pleased to welcome Andrea Trimarchi and Simone Faresin from Forma Fantasma. Hello. Forma Fantasma is a research-based design studio in Amsterdam, and their practice embraces a broad spectrum of typologies and methods, from product design through spatial design, strategic planning, and design consultancy. Also, we have here with us Helen Turner and Pablo Wendel, and they are joint artistic directors of E-Werk Luckenwalde. E-Werk Luckenwalde is an art center and a renewable power station 30 minutes south of Berlin. So very welcome, and we would like to jump into the conversation.
Well, our first question would be to Graciela. Julie's Bicycle was established in 2007 as a non-profit company helping the cultural sector to reduce its environmental impacts and develop new thinking in tune with global environmental challenges. Julie's Bicycle is acknowledged as the leading organization bridging sustainability with the arts and culture. Can you tell us a bit more? How did this all get started, and how does it work, and what kind of services do you provide?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Matthias, for such a kind introduction. Thank you, Daria, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today. Yes, Julie's Bicycle is a charity. We work in the intersection of climate and culture. It started with the music sector. One day, 14 years ago, a number of musicians said, we must do something about this is urgent, the environmental crisis is urgent, we need to do something about climate change. And they created the organization to empower the sector, initially music, now we work with all sectors from visual arts to museums, performing arts, literature as well, and music. And the way we work is mobilizing the cultural sector into change, bringing everybody together in the ecosystem together, because this is really an ecosystem. We need to look at relationships between artists, commissioning, funding, and that's a very important program that we have. We work with Arts Council England, that is the main arts funder in England. They provide funding to 800 organizations, and as part of this work, organizations need to identify their environmental impact, the climate change impact, come with an action plan, and submit indicators and data to our online tools every year. So every year we analyze all the information and we produce a report that is available online, and you can have a look, and we look at accelerating innovation. Then there is other projects as well. One is specifically about learning from each other in the cultural sector and accelerating innovation. And from there, we went into policy, city policy, building bridges between environmental policy at city level and cultural policies. We are now spreading that work internationally, because this year the climate change negotiations are happening in Glasgow, in the UK. And so that was a very good opportunity to start working globally, looking into strengthen the sector in terms of cultural policy and climate change policy.
And Graciela, since you also work with art museums, what is your impression, like where they are in the ecologizing their practices? Because I have a feeling, I don't know what about Great Britain, I think you're ahead of the process, but what is also your impression? Where are the museums? Why it's a bit, why something is hindering them to start to act?
Yes, we think that the visual art sectors and the museum sector, there is a lot of work to do. You're right. When we look at globally, when you think that there is around 60,000 museums in the world, I think there is around 20,000 public galleries and another 20,000 commercial galleries as well. As I said, it's a whole ecosystem. It still feels that it's in its infancy, that there is a lot of work to do. But we are thinking definitely pockets of excellence and leadership from artists. There is a number of artists that are coming with very, very creative commissioning and programming and changing the way they use materials and change the way they put exhibitions. And I think it's now about knowing more about all these experiences. With COVID, we've been doing a lot of talks with museums across Europe, and I've been very impressed, really, because it may not be holistic, but most, of course, you would say it's our sample, but most of the museums we've been talking to got some level of activity. For instance, the museums in Finland are going through a very broad project with the Biennale as well, with the Helsinki Biennale, are looking into incorporating all these principles and translating into programming into environmental and climate change issues. In Sweden, for instance, all the museums report their carbon emissions, because anybody that receives funding from the government needs to report, and they are now looking, well, what are we doing after understanding where our carbon footprint is? The same with museums in the Netherlands and in other parts. Really, we see really a growing movement. Maybe the next step is to accelerate that change definitely understanding better where the key elements are. You touch on environmental conditions, which is something that creates a lot of discussions about changing parameters of humidity and controls, and there is the BSOT protocol anyway that is trying to put more emphasis on climate impact as well. So we are quite positive, but there is a lot of work to be done, really, understanding individually as organizations better the impacts and committing. No, so we look at in a holistic way to museums as relationships between the people that manage the museum, the artists, the visitors, and we think that it's quite important not only focus on environmental issues, but focusing on people, no, capacity building, and supporting people that are driving all this change.
Yeah. And you already mentioned the term of ecosystem is super interesting. I think in this case, we will come back to it, I think, a bit later. But you mentioned reporting and also the Art Council program that you designed as Julie's Bicycle for this organization. What is their role of policymakers also, or of giving some guidelines to institutions? Or is it like self-initiative of institutions that is more important in this case?
I think at the very beginning of Julie's Bicycle, of course, when you start a relationship, you make proposals, they may come back with something different. Then somehow the City of London got involved and they said, oh, we want to do this as well. So, you know, catalyzing, they said, okay, we want to be there. Let's do some case studies. Let's publish some guidance. So there was already guidance, I think, in 2008 from the City of London for the arts sector. So I think it's all these synergies between each actor in this ecosystem that makes you make change and stepping up. And now it developed it wasn't a very formalized program with Arts Council initially, no? It started with training for all organizations. Then we developed the online tools where people report, and the online tools are free to use for everybody. So you can calculate your carbon footprint. They are designed for cultural organizations. And then it was when the Arts Council England, that goes in parallel, was happening at city policy and national policy as well in terms of climate change, because the UK had a climate change law that is now more than 10 years old. So it was the first country that adopted a climate change law. Then many countries passed climate change laws based on that model. But it was also based on what's happening in the political agenda, really. So it's a response. So funding organizations also respond to the level of discussions that you have at political level. And now it's very formalized, the program. So it's got, but it's strong on capacity building, really, because so people feel that they need to get trained, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning, really, in this.
Yeah, thank you so much for this interesting insight. We will come back later to the ecosystem. And now I would like to ask Janina and Alexei also about the personal responsibility of art workers, of artists or other producers. You wrote this Art Footprint Manifesto. Probably you could tell us what kinds of alternative ways of production you propose in this manifesto?
But actually, I would like to start with like some introduction to this. That how did we come to this idea? It was very easy. Some years ago, we started trying to go zero waste in our everyday life, because we are a couple. We are a family, we're a household. So we started the zero waste thing in our personal lives. And the next step was very, very natural to our professional life. Because if we are so concerned about ecology and waste things in our everyday life, how about professional life? I've been working as an artist since many decades and recently many years as a curator. And what I see that how art system encounters and deals with ecological problems, it rather represents them without offering any solution. So our system exists as an established thing that was formed decades ago, and it goes on the same way now. And it doesn't really meet the challenges. It doesn't. It only aesthetize them or criticize them, but again in the same formats: exhibitions, material objects. Air flights, that requires air flights, transportation of big objects, installation of the exhibition. So the system can be improved, but steps. One step is like reducing carbon footprint of the art system and art production, which we call art footprint. Art footprint, yes, zero waste art. And then we offer to proceed to new forms of creative activity, which exists nowadays, but very marginal. One more thing I would like to say is that we see art as an essential part of existing economical system, which is linear economy, and also as a very essential part of neoliberal political system, which we have now. So in order to change the art world, we definitely need to change the economical and political system. Otherwise, it just won't work, because art serves a special role, very important role in the existing system. And we can kind of make it better, we can work on it, but it will not make a radical change. So the first step would be zero waste art, which Inina will talk about now. And the next step, again, as I said, we would offer, in our manifesto, we offer to proceed to other eco-friendly and really sustainable artistic life. We don't call it them even artistic, creative activities. Mm-hmm. So let's share the screen. Yeah, share the screen.
We present to artists and art institutions the 6 steps of zero waste art: refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, rot, and react. As much as possible, we need to refuse in order to break linear economy by use through buy again, which overproduce goods and services. What we can't refuse, we can reduce. We can be more thoughtful, for example, in the materials we choose for artwork or set up in gallery and museums. The next step is to reuse as much as possible. We can give art tools, devices, and materials a second life by reusing them personally or sharing with friends, artists, or other galleries and museums. A few months ago, the group Who Needs Podium was launched on Facebook for sharing art stuff in Moscow. There is a similar Facebook group in St. Petersburg. And what we can't reuse, we need to recycle, despite the fact that the system of separate waste collection is still far from adequate in post-Soviet countries. We are artists and institutions to introduce a system of separate collection of waste in their studios, galleries, and museums. All other waste, which is organic, we can route. The easiest way is to install garbage disposer in studio or museums, but we know that artists in St. Petersburg have a vermi farm with worms in their studio, and the fertile soil that they get from the vermi farm they use for growing plants in their studio. And the last step is to react. Today, react should not only be about raising the theme of environmental problems in artworks and curatorial projects. It must be also about declaring and emphasizing eco-friendly methods of creating artworks and art exhibitions. It is also about consolidating and demanding from the influential art institutions to develop common eco-standards. And the main aim is to make the art sphere sustainable.
Yeah. Can you also add something on your proposal for alternativism, if I pronounce it right?
Okay, so first of all, I propose everybody here to check, not now maybe, but later, our Art Footprint Manifesto.
I can show you.
Yeah, which is, we have a website for it. Oops.
Yeah, I think our communicators team could also share the link in the chat, so you don't need to do it now.
Yeah, so actually these activities exist, and these activities are not about making art objects to be shown in museums or galleries. It's more about activities that may not be even considered as art from the art system point of view. For example, permaculture activities like growing food in a creative way, things like that. And even refusing from making art in order to proceed to other activities. I mean, all this, also you can mention different DIY activities, activities that go out kind of this circuit of consumption, production, throwing out, not repairing things. So simple things, organizing communities, teaching ecological agendas also. So these things that, again, might not be considered as art, but we think they're really important in order to, I don't know, to have a sustainable world and to somehow react to the challenges we have.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have here also a nice comment in the chat from Anna Dietrich. She added that reimagine, reflect, and rethink also is part of the zero waste. And I think that's a good somehow transfer to Simone and Andrea, because as designers, they have quite an unusual approach. They don't really they're not only interested in the final product, but their practice is research-based, and they're investigating what forces are shaping the design today. And how you came to this investigative approach, and could you elaborate a bit on this view and give us some examples if you would like to?
Yes, of course. Thank you all for the invitation and really inspiring presentations. We totally engage with what has been said so far. It is a real struggle to, to develop exhibitions that conceive also the, or to take in consideration the impact that exhibition making has in the environment. And I have to say, in this moment in time, we are at the same time producing exhibition about our own work, but at the same time also, we're part of our practice also designing exhibition. And we know the struggle also in the engagement with the institutions that definitely are interested in, thinking about the sustainable, or let's say the ecological impact of the exhibition making. But at the same time, they do not want to accept that there is the need of a different thinking. So for instance, we are often commissioned to do one exhibition design. At the same time, all the time we say, we need to understand the programming of a year, because only in that way we can really understand in which way our own exhibition design can play a role in other exhibitions that are happening before and after.
Yeah, you were mentioning before the paint, like if you know that in a lineup you have 3 exhibitions and all of them needs white, then it's even better, because you don't need to repaint all the time the space, or you start from the lighter color, then you get to the darker. I mean, they are all technical small details that really could change a lot the way you conceive the exhibition. But maybe we can also, for sure there is also a question later about that. But then maybe we can also tell you more about our approach and why we came out to what we do. And yeah, Sarante prima, yeah. And
Maybe I think, Daria, you were also referring to our work that we did most recently as an example at Serpentine Galleries in London, which was an exhibition called Cambio, where we investigated the governance of the timber industry as a subject. And for us, what was interesting is that we didn't want to do a design exhibition in a public institution that was about product, but we wanted to do it much more about that infrastructure that we as designers often give it for granted, to understand the politics, the shape and industry that we all the time end up in, supporting, in this case, the extraction of wood from forests. The exhibition, in this sense, I have to say, it was somehow probably traditional in its setting up, because it was still based on, on sculptural works that created somehow an experience in space. Nevertheless, we had the chance to think about also with the curators how to conceive the exhibition. So we sourced, for instance, the materials more locally when we could, and we try as much as possible to not build sort of partitions or fake walls in the space. And also we have been discussing with Serpentine for a very long time also how to conceive the touring of the exhibition. So to reduce as much as possible the materials to very few elements, and to source locally materials that could support the making of the exhibition design. And while if we go back to the content of the exhibition, it was all about entering conversation with a variety of practitioners that are often not part of the design conversation, such as, for instance, scientists or a philosopher, an institution throughout England, so that the, let's say, the context where the exhibition is taking place, in this case, London, is somehow also influencing the content itself of the exhibition. And we came to, as a practice, we came to be interested in these subjects because when you are a designer, at one point in your practice, you end up facing these questions that are really sometimes problematic about how can I, as a designer, not be focusing only in delivering services and objects or whatever to a possible user, but at the same time question, what is that is allowing me to do this? How are materials extracted? How are they, distributed, and so on? Because we believe that as designers, if we look into these subjects, we can develop a more, in fact, holistic perspective that can allow us to come up with proposals that can be transformative, not only in the way we deliver products or object to a possible user, but also in the whole process of conception.
May I ask you if you're also realizing projects for in a rather commercial context, or at least commission projects? How can you bring in such a perspective and such strategies in a context that is rather foreign to such a thinking?
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think what is interesting actually that, as probably Daria mentioned before, we're actually a commercial studio that does research. And I think for us, it's very important to mention that, because, we need to balance, the commercial side with a more, I would say, artistic or self-initiated research-based projects.
I think for us, what is interesting of working in this way is that at the same time, we have a much closer look to some of the system we criticize. Not always we can be successful, honestly, in the conversation we establish, but we hope that over time, our more independent works will have an impact in our more commercial dialogues. For instance, in this moment, thanks to the exhibition, that we see it as a form of manifesto of how we can operate as an external R&D to accompanying producers. We engage in a conversation with a furniture producer, but not to design products, but to look at their chains of custody and to be involved into the rethinking, or not rethinking necessarily, but to the reconception of what they do from the perspective of a biome, in that case, the forest. We need to establish conversations that are much more sort of on a long term. And it's very, very difficult. And
especially because, you know, in design, there is this tradition of royalty. So even when you try to establish a different conversation with a company, they really even don't know how to pay you, you know, because there's no this figure of, you know, external consultant. So it's quite difficult to manage that. But it's quite interesting that since a couple of years, we are starting to get more and more requests. So also it's interesting the company are looking into ecology and, you know, with a, you know, effort to really change the system. So that's quite good.
Maybe if you, sorry, we are in two, so we speak more. I just want to say something about what has been said before. I think one struggle also that public institutions have in addressing their ecological impact is also because of the idea of the white cube. It is the museum or the exhibition space is always seen as a white box that needs to be filled with content. So I think also the idea of how the space has been conceived over time is not allowing really, or is not encouraging an ecological thinking. And even when we talk about how exhibitions are often described and even turn into, you know, historicize, if that's a word in English, I'm sorry. There is often a estimation of the physical conditions of the space and the impact that it have in the work. And so this sort of relationship between the work and the space and the making of the work and the exhibiting of the work and its ecology is also something that needs to be rethought not only on a physical level, but also in the way we talk about the making of exhibitions.
And I think that also the example of Cambio is like basically very interesting example of where how to do becomes the form of what it is. So the kind of methodology is also combined with the final form of the product of exhibition or of artwork. Probably could you a bit elaborate on what sensitivity or what additional power we need to start to rethink our action, to rethink our products, to rethink our material production? What kind of probably sensitivity do you have as designers to start also thinking about your final product not as a design product, but of research and of this holistic approach? What is the difference? How to make this difference?
Well, you know, it always depends on also on your own practice. I think that what we see as extremely problematic when we talk with our clients or with the people we work with, but even when we work independently, is that you know, within our practice, we all the time to be self-critical with what we do, and maybe not enough, but I mean, or that's at least what we're trying to do. But when we see, for instance, entire companies working, for instance, with basically one material, wood, or it can be plastic, it can be glass or whatever, and seeing that our clients sometimes do not wonder or do not question the sourcing of you know, their materials, we find that extremely problematic. We've seen, for instance, in food and all different culture growing in the last years, where sort of there is much more care also from the perspective of the user regarding these subjects. But in the productions of things, it seems that the focus is all the time on a very narrow-minded idea of innovation, which is based on the fulfillment of the desires of the user. So innovation is all the time seen as, you know, what is my user wanting from me? And it's never about creating innovation on how you deliver that final outcome to the user, which is what we are interested in exploring. But the biggest problem, I think, is subdivision of responsibilities and roles in the process of design. So to give you an example, again, when you to go back to the exhibition as an entity, as an example. Again, when we are asked as exhibition designers to work on an exhibition, of course, you can make more considered choices in materials and so on. But again, it is so narrow-minded to think that, for instance, you can work as designer in a bubble, considering one exhibition only, when there is maybe 10 exhibitions happening within an institution in the course of 2 years. And so there is no relationship between the designer, the rest of the institution, the other curators, to think more on a long term, what you do with the materials you take within the space. Or even the example of Andrea about paint that he made before, it's an extremely interesting example. You have sometimes lineup of exhibitions where, one curator says, let's do the walls red. And the other one then wants the walls green. You need to go back to white first. But you know what I mean? Like, it's an insane amount of material that if you would have sit down around the table with all these different practitioners, you would be able to think much more holistically. But you cannot do that because it all boils down otherwise to very important aspects of an ecological development, like reusing, recycling, which is what we also try to do with our exhibition design. But we could be much more holistically involved if there is more dialogue between the different parts that compose an institution.
Thank you so much for this interesting insight. I think we will also come back probably to some points regarding production afterwards that you mentioned. I think we could also switch to Helen and Paolo, because their institution is also a very interesting example of where how becomes what, and of this overlapping of methodology and making. Could you tell us probably a bit about what is Kunststrom or art power, and how this idea turned into the foundation of the E-Werk?
Hello. Yeah, thank you to having us here. We're really happy to join this discussion. It started I think it's nearly 10 years ago. I started with the idea to generate electricity out of art. And when I started to question what electricity this art produces, then I realized it's not just the normal nuclear power or like a sustainable energy. It's something unique, it's something beautiful, it's something related to an aesthetic experience. So it's something different, and I started to call it art Kunststrom, art electricity. And on the beginning, it was basically started out of a crisis basically I had as an artist, to walking in a metaphor with metaphors, walking in with ephemeral materials, which is not so easy to survive, and with performances using your body. And I realized I need to somehow develop a sustainable economic infrastructure as well. And
so, if I could just add at that point as well, I think it was unsustainable, this kind of practice you were existing in as an artist, because Pablo was sort of quite successful in having exhibitions really internationally, but he wasn't being paid appropriately for those kind of opportunities. So it's kind of, he was being invited places in exchange for opportunity rather than finance, which was a completely problematic situation with the art world at that point in time. And I just think that's important to know. So exactly.
So one idea was to create a certain autonomy with recycling material, but also by producing your own energy, and I didn't need to pay the energy bill anymore, which sometimes I couldn't pay. And so it became more and more projects like sculptures, installations. I think we could share maybe one example with you to explain how this looks like or how this works. And the project became bigger, and I realized it's way more energy than I need myself. And that was the beginning of the idea of Performance Electrics. It's an energy provider. So I started to feed in this electricity in the national grid. And that was a very interesting point because suddenly I realized this electricity it's leaving somehow. And the question, where does the art begin, or where does it end? Is it the cable? Is it the fuse box? Or is now, on the other hand, the person who buys this electricity from you by changing the energy provider, is he suddenly also surrounded with this Kunststrom? How does this impact him? How does it change him? The economic model of it was founding a non-for-profit energy provider. So basically all the money being generated with this art electricity is going back to 100% new creative projects. So as more people consume of this electricity, as more they support art. So everyone out there, welcome to change the energy provider and support us. And this is an image I'm showing here with a project, a very early project, thinking of all the waste, light energy in a street, like here in a shopping street in Stuttgart. And looking out of my studio, I thought there must be a way to recycle this light. So of course, light, you can use solar panels. And so I installed solar panels instead facing the sun, facing the surface of the advertisement board, and basically recycle the light back. And all the cables went across the street and were supporting one tiny off space we were running at a time. With a tiny light bulb, it was not much coming out of this. But the light bulb was sometimes brighter or less bright, depends how many people had their shop light on. And it started something bigger. It started a conversation through all the shop owners. So it was quite an installation which had a big impact on the street, and it changed the way how we see things. And yeah, as more as I got into energy, I realized we don't have an energy problem in this world. I think it's just the way how we access it and how we use it. It's the biggest problem. And also the art institution, I often saw they spend way more on their side costs, like a museum, for example, the side costs is so high. It's a way higher than the amounts they spend into young emerging artists, for example, or sometimes even in the exhibition making. And I thought this is also a way to change it, because suddenly through their side costs, they support art. And that was very important. But also I realized as more has become to know all this technology, that we have to start to be way more honest with what energy is. I suddenly realized energy is everything. It's food, it's the food production, it's building, it's infrastructure, mobility. It's like everything is we're surrounded by energy on many levels. And I think now these days we often hear a number like the energy production is now 30. Some people mention even 50% on sustainable energy. That's totally wrong, because if you're honest, we have less than 1% we produce sustainable. If you include all the primer energy, which is like the energy to use to build something up or to transport it up or to even feed somebody. So it's very complex to calculate this. But starting with this number, like 1% or a little bit less, that's like nothing. So I realized we're on a super early stage and we are on it's so late to start with this. And I remember the discussion 20 years ago when I was younger, and I always thought, why do we not change? And so that was a very important number for me. And I started at this time to really change my life and everything. And looking on the footprint, looking on the energy, but also combine it with the idea that the energy can be a sustainable way, but it can be also an aesthetic experience. So something, it doesn't have to be, we always see everything so technically, so technocratic, and it's all about efficiency and about the numbers and of course the finance, the benefit from it. And no, it doesn't have to be like this. It can be about the beauty. And especially in the sustainable energy field, a lot of things out there not change and go ahead because of the way how people see it, because it's the way how people don't like all the solar panels on the roof or the horrible windmills changing our beautiful landscape. And yeah, of course, it's been developed by someone who is like an engineer or someone just thinking about numbers and technical aspects. So if we start to think in an aesthetic way of it, how does it appear? And it's not always about the efficiency. It can be everything so beautiful and so different. And I think that's a big chance towards it. And yeah, that's how we come across, it's like 3 years ago, finding the E-Werk Luckenwalde, which was an old power plant and run on brown coal. And yeah, maybe Helen, you say something about.
Yeah. Yeah, so we started E-Werk Luckenwalde in 2019, and that was kind of born from this idea of Kunststrom, and Pablo was kind of constantly expanding whilst he was in Stuttgart. And he had 25 clients, performance electrics clients throughout Germany, who were all switched to Kunststrom electricity. And then Pablo had this wild idea to transform a former brown coal power station into a Kunststrom Kraftwerk. And it was really important, this kind of transformation which echoes what Pablo was saying earlier, because it is important to use the grey energy of the building. So not to build a new power station, not to use all this energy to create new infrastructure, but to reuse these kind of relics of the fossil fuel era, who hopefully will become extinct like dinosaurs, but who knows? So Pablo was looking around everywhere for an appropriate building and was led to Brandenburg, and specifically Luckenwalde, which, if nobody is aware of it, is the sort of outer belt of Berlin. We're 30 minutes south of Berlin. And it's this phenomenal brown coal building that was built in 1913. And at that point, it was sort of 20, 30 years after the genesis of electricity. And we worked very closely with a lot of the men who used to work here when it was a brown coal power station. And they told us that apparently they used to call electricity cold light, because it was this suspicious kind of mythical entity that people didn't really believe in. And you can see that echoed throughout the architecture of the building. So for instance, the main entrance to the building is this incredible stained glass window of a fist purporting lightning bolts, and then this cascade of light bulbs into the entrance hall. And the turbine hall is really kind of municipal rather than industrial. It's like a ballroom. And it was built this way in order to persuade people of the kind of benefits of electricity. And when Pablo first brought me to Luckenwalde and said, just come and have a look at this building, maybe you should quit your job in London and move out here with me, I was just completely blown away by the kind of potential of this, and also the kind of philosophical echo of that time of trying to persuade people of the benefits of electricity then, and now of people trying to transform into this kind of ecological revolution and believe in the practice. And there is so much need to kind of persuade people, which I think is one of kind of our missions here, is to kind of make electricity or power in its greater sense more accessible to people. And I think one of the reasons that Pablo started Performance Electrics and the development of Kunststrom was to decentralize power and to create kind of more autonomous structures. So I moved out to Luckenwalde and I curate the space here. So I devise a quarterly contemporary art program together with the team of curators. And we really try, I mean, it was really interesting what form of Phantasma, Andre and Simone, you were talking about this kind of like how to create more sustainable infrastructures within the kind of curatorial practices of the institution. And I feel quite lucky that I'm the co-director here with Pablo, who is an artist, because we think about the institution as this kind of functioning artwork as well. And this poly institution, like trying to think of it as a point of critique, I guess. So thinking what the white cube is, why does it have to be a white cube? No, it doesn't have to be. This place can be a laboratory, it can be a workshop, it can be a research center, it can be an exhibition space, commissioning space, all these kind of different things that it can possibly be, and to try and break down those walls of what an institution can be, I guess. And then in terms of kind of the sustainable curatorial practices, again, it was interesting about the paint idea, because we're really trying to embroider those ideas into the curatorial framework of eWork. So we try and create layering of exhibitions so that each exhibition in the whole year's programming would feed into one another. So you wouldn't deinstall the exhibition in winter, for instance, that would stay, and then the spring exhibition would layer on top of that in the summer, and they all feed conceptually into one another and also relationally within the space. So, I mean, and I think another benefit to starting our own thing and leading it is that it's a huge experiment, and we kind of hold our hands up and can admit failure if it happens and say, well, you know, we're trying this and it might not work, but at least we're trying. And I think that's a huge mission of ours, to actually take action rather than just sit passively. And I think that was a big incentive of Pablo's as well to start Performance Electrics. We was just so sick of the art world talking about it and making gestures, but actually complicitly going along with the kind of detriment of the industry.
What I found really interesting is what a long way you went from maybe, let's say, artistically speaking, from a fascination for a material, which is in this case invisible and very special, and you need to have a feeling about it. Eventually, I'm really curious about how this feels, you know, to spend a whole life, let's say, and working with this material. And on the other hand, I'm asking myself, is this scalable? I mean, where are you could you head towards, or how could you scale it?
Yeah, I mean, when we started with the power station here, I mean, it was quite a big scale already, because I mean, it was a former ground coal power plant providing energy for the city with 20 or 40,000 inhabitants, plus the villages, other small towns around. At the time, it was quite a big power station, 1913 built. There was not much electricity around. And finding this like kind of fossil relict from this old time here, with an very like primitive like energy production. Like there were like 500 tons of coal every day being just burned and without catalyst out of the chimney. And the first idea I saw that there must be a way to turn this power station on again, and on in a way not with ground coal, in a sustainable way. So we get together all this time victims, people who used to work here, volunteers, engineers. So it was a big team thinking and starting slowly with this process to turn it on. And on the beginning, we even ourselves, sometimes didn't believe it's possible. And so we come across this technology. It's called wood gas. Wood chips are used, like small cutted wood, and it gets turned into gas. It's an old technology. And this wood gas basically is going into a normal car engine or truck engine in this case, and producing electricity with it. And also, by the engine is warm, as you know, a car, the double amount of it, it's heat. So with this heat, we were able to heat the whole house, all the studios, all the exhibition rooms. And on top, we had like electricity for everything, plus we fed it in, and we had a lot of clients we could support. And after 3 years hard work, I mean, it's a nice idea to start with, but it's like physical hard work.
And just to make it clear, like Pablo has literally turned the power station back on. So all the mechanical infrastructure that was built in 1913 has been switched back on. So working with the men who used to work here to get their engineering knowledge, he has managed to sort of reactivate this dinosaur.
Yeah. So, and to your question, I think with this experience, I realized something bigger than just your own little households to change, to transform in something else. It's possible. And it was really exciting feeling to know that was basically a proof of, it is possible. It's possible on a bigger scale. And from now on, I really believe we are all together able to make this transformation on a big, big scale. And that's something, for me, it was encouraging, and I hope it's encouraging for other people as well. And we also support people to change their energy problem, which they have. Of course, not everyone has a power station to turn on, but there's a lot you can do if you really want. But you have to want it, and it's hard work. And that's basically, I think, and that's what I believe as an artist as well. We have as a cultural people working in the culture or in the art field, we have so much power. I mean, the other side of the power, but we somehow not use it. I mean, the whole thing, it has to become, I feel like it has to cultivate it. It has to become a kind of a lifestyle. It has to become something powerful, and we have to work together more on this topic, and to make this in a way attractive, and to make this something natural. And I believe that's possible.
Yeah, there are so many comments also in the chat. Great talk. Climate neutrality is a new aesthetic grammar. I like the idea because it resonates very well with your practice and also Forma Phantasma. I think we have a couple of minutes more for the discussion, because I think the activation of Benoit won't take so long today after the discussion. So just probably a question to all of you. I don't know who would like to respond. What are barriers and difficulties also in making more sustainable practices and achieving also a shift in perspective, a shift in thinking and making?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I think everything is here in our brains. We are used to certain patterns of behavior, certain patterns of art making and showing art and things like that. And and again, institutions, art institutions were formed a long time ago, so they go on with on the same path, the same circuit. We have to change all that. This is it. This is very easy. But how? Step by step, probably. not revolutionary, but evolutionary. And I think that projects that are presented here are very good examples of how we can move a little bit towards this change.
Yeah, and I think it also, all these presentations show the power of individuals as well, no? About, leadership and taking those brave steps of doing something differently, and perseverance. Eloy's perseverance as well, to break all those silos in terms of the way the organizations work, and in terms of criteria used for decision making, no? And there's some values under those decision making processes as well, which maybe needs a bit more, they need to be reformulated or rethought in terms of growing, or more exhibitions is the way to go, and more grand, and using more and more materials. And so they say, and I think that there needs to be, all these experiences need to be shared, and doing a lot of joining the dots, because there is now a certain level of experiences, but to step up, I think is very good, all these events. Thank you for organizing, because we can get in touch after all this and keep on growing.
No, I also think, for instance, that in general, as a practitioners, we must be in all the way possible involved on different scale of production that comes really from education to production of exhibition, production of objects. I think the only way of really make changes, as Janina and Alexei said before, it's also about really make small steps, but make it. It's I really believe in the power of the singular. So.
And the collectivity at the same time, because for instance, when we started to be involved with the heading of a master department in Eindhoven, we did it, which is a design academy in Holland. We did it not only because we are interested in education, but also because we understood that with our practice, there is a certain level of radicality we can have, but there are, the way we can contribute to the world is also through the works of others and through a larger community. So in this way, we also see a form of education as a way to involve others in some of the questions we have and let them continue. Also because, our lifetime is rather short and the problems we're talking about are extensive. So if we start to think about into multiple generations conversation, we can have an impact which is much more long lasting instead of focusing on what we can do in a lifetime or on a limited project. Even the problem regarding scale, for instance, can be addressed not only in a short amount of time, but maybe on a much longer term. And so, education, we think it's really key.
And I think it's also a question of awareness, to work on a political scale, and not only on recycling cardboard, let's say.
It's important also that, but I think it's, we all the time say that you need to have like a short-term plan, a medium plan, and then a long-term plan. Of course, recycling, it's important, but it's not the
It's a short-term solution, and politics are definitely relevant.
There is a question there. I don't know if there is still time.
We need to ask Jessica. Jessica.
Yes, let me jump in. There is more than one question in the chat. I just didn't want to interrupt you. So, so direct question to Graciela. What are the biggest barriers when accompanying art institutions to a permacircular path? As there are structural points that are similar in many institutions and that make the process difficult.
To be honest, we are finding that organizations are really at a lot of different levels. I'm not completely sure if there is just one thing. I've been working, for instance, with a very, very large museum where there was an amazing level of awareness and knowledge within the staff. But the staff were saying that senior management were not supportive of the changes they wanted to do. So then you get exactly the contrary. You got amazing boards everybody full on board, very aware, they want to be more transformational, and then they say, okay, we find out that we're going to have to really work in a lot of detail with curators, with producers, because they are a bit resistant to change. So I think I'm not completely sure if it's sometimes it's senior management, sometimes lack of capacity, lack of knowledge. Sometimes is the business model, really, with very, very large exhibition institutions that are focusing on having, I don't know, 6 global exhibitions around the world every year. So there's a business model because they don't have enough income, so they look into broader markets. And in other organizations, they get this through commercializing, using a sort of renting the space, from weddings to all sort of other things. So I think lack of resource also is pushing many organizations into a type of business model. And I think that's something to review. And lastly, we are piloting some work with the Barbican now, and we are looking from the conception, hopefully to the end of the exhibition that is going to be next year, all individual steps in terms of sustainability. And we are writing a journal about this, and we want to make it public. We try to publish as much as possible because I think it's quite interesting. And a lot of the things that Andrea and Simone said, we are seeing that as well in a large organization. Sometimes when you want to do one exhibition in certain ways, you need to involve the whole organization, and that's quite interesting, really.
Yes, sure, that's a very important point. And as you say it, just a question comes into my mind that was that we collected yesterday during the opening live stream via Mentimeter, and just relates to what you were saying. So you, as Julie's Bicycle, are supporting institutions, small ones, bigger ones, on their way to this own reflection on the footprint and how to be able to first tackle where the resources are missing. And you were mentioning also the CEOs of institutions, and the questions that was raised yesterday was who are the CEOs of a permacultural museum? So, I mean, we asked our audience yesterday what they think, how could a museum, a permacircular museum, look like? So that would be my question to all of you, actually. I don't know, Janina, Alexei. Maybe
There's an interesting question in the chat. What do you answer those who are afraid that sustainability is the enemy of their personal creativity? And I think I have the answer. I mean, if you look at art history, the meaning of art and meaning of artistic activity was changing with different coming challenges. And now we have to choose, and you have to choose your personal creativity or Mother Earth and nature around, yeah? And I think the question is obvious. And I think those who are concerned about personal creativity just have to think what creative they can do in order to really meet the challenges we have. Mm-hmm. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. I just need to sort myself. Any thoughts on the previous post question? Other than that, there was another one directed to Pablo and Helen. So speaking of your energy production, who do you provide energy for today? So only for the EWAC projects, or also buildings in the neighborhood, or even clients far away?
So we have 35 clients throughout Germany at the moment, and they're composed of museums, Kunsthallen, private individuals, offices, studios. And basically you can switch to Kunststrom directly via our website, just like you would with any other electricity generator. And so Pablo produces electricity via the mechanical infrastructure of EVERC, and that powers the whole building. So all of our contemporary art program is powered by Kunststrom, and then the excess power is fed into the national grid and distributed throughout Germany. And we collaborate with Bürgerwerke, who is an energy provider who basically help to provide local energy. So if we're not able to produce enough energy, then Bürgerwerke will compensate with 100% green energy in a more local environment. So I think that was quite important to us as well, because I think to localize your energy production, so you're not just getting it from anywhere, so your energy will come from the nearest possible energy provider. So I think that's a real illusion with energy, is if you switch to green energy, that's not actually green energy coming through your socket unless you are actually at EVERC. It's just a big ocean of electricity that you just get like a composite of kind of nuclear, renewable, coal. So I think when you support green energy or Kunststrom or anything like that, what you're doing is you're supporting them financially to improve and to sort of capacity build, which I think is really important.
I mean, in a minute, it's a very small amount we produce compared to big energy providers. But I believe a little bit, this tiny bit is like more like a homeopathic dose, which definitely has an impact and pulsate. I think it will make a change. And yeah.
Well, yeah, you have to start somewhere, don't you? We always believe in this. To take the risk, is way more important than actually failing. So
yeah, that just a quote from Tino Segal, who joined yesterday. He said, when you have to change your habit, then it hurts. I mean, yeah, it kind of fits. So I just got a private chat question also that I would like to throw in. How to push radical changes that modify the norm of what museums are and do acceptable to all parties involved. For example, ditching air-conditioned climate control, which potentially means no more conservation of collections. So I don't know, who is that question for, Daria?
I think Graciela probably, also
I can
Pablo and Helen.
Yeah, we, for instance, there is museums that have made a decision. They have completely modified their ventilation system and they use natural ventilation. And if they got certain pieces of art that they still want to show, so they use specific enclosures. But it is a difficult decision. It's not a one-day decision. I think it's really a process within the organization in terms of change and working together with management, with curators, and making that commitment. A museum that works in that way is the University of Manchester, the Whitworth Museum, but there is some other ones. It's not really the only one. So and it's making decisions about what needs to be shown. So the BSOT protocol, I think I mentioned it, is the protocol that looks at becoming more flexible with parameters. But yeah, there is a lobby work to do with the International Association of Museums in terms of really implementing the BSOT protocol, because there is a very, very conservative approach still.
Yeah, I think what is also important to mention in this case is that there is certain flexibility also on this question around the conservators, and so that's also I think according to last papers it's like 16 to 25 degrees might be in the space, so it's like really not that fixed, I think. And I think we also need to achieve some kind of flexibilization through asking where these norms come from, because I think that they were decided somehow in the 60s and then they are accepted without questioning them. And also somehow I think that institutions are of course afraid that nobody will lend them a work if they somehow don't stick to this norms. So that's a whole process also in the ecosystem involving all the partners on all the levels that needs to change this approach. And probably we can also even think that institutions themselves can expect lending or receiving objects can also change something in the loan conditions, so that they can request, for example, green transportation for their objects or something like this. So we can also think of these little steps coming from the institutions themselves and not waiting that somebody will decide this kind of things for them.
Daria, we have another question to former Phantasma. So very practical. What are the little techniques and tricks to plan exhibition design along a long-term perspective?
Well, there is not really a rule book. I guess it is really about what we would say, essentially, is I think the first one is that, at least from our experience, generally you are in contact with a curator, and then only very late in the process, you are in contact with the producers of the exhibition, because also of, sorry, our dog, of regulations regarding the, sorry. I think only in the second moment, the producer steps in. And I think this lack of conversation between the designer, the producer, and the curator is really problematic, because you conceive an exhibition without necessarily knowing how the exhibition will be executed. You can give indications, but the lack of conversation is problematic. But of course, it is difficult to be in touch with a producer, because generally there are public pitches for that. And that creates really a lot of troubles in the conception of the exhibition. I would say also the one we are convinced is the most important is that I think a designer should be involved not to one exhibition but many exhibitions, so that you can conceive much more the flow of materials and colors and paint and necessities, so that you can create maybe flexibility in that, and also looking into the facilities of the museum. For instance, recently we did an exhibition for a museum, we're actually doing it, for a museum in Utrecht, and they had a small workshop internal to the museum, but they were often not doing many of the exhibition, because the majority of the constructions in the museum has always been done creating huge partitions, and they have a small workshop. So for instance, we wanted to just work with them, and so we did modular structures so that they can be built inside the museum. And possibly, if they are interested, they can be redismantled and reused more. And so we did, smaller modules that can be mounted together. So I would say it's like, essentially, look closely what is in there and try to create a conversation between the people within the museum.
Thank you. So, Daria, I think I only see one question left for the moment that was posted in the chat earlier. It's how to make perhaps a boring but relatively achievable change exciting, for example, switching to LED lights in a museum, etc. Maybe that goes to Helen and Pablo.
Well, I don't think it's just about the small things. The light bulb, it's often like art institutions, they're huge and massive, and the way how they've been designed and built, it's totally wrong already, thinking about waste or energy. And it's very hard now to make them change. We often had museums, we worked together, they wanted to change the whole building into a Kunststrom provided building, which is technically or aesthetically absolutely possible. But often it's like the regulations out there or the political constellation, as we talked about, are often a big problem, even if they wanted to change. And I think there needs to be a way, like how museums become a bit more, subversive to make this change. And by just doing it. And of course, by changing the light bulb, but by also, why not just put solar panels on the roof or in front of the exhibition place? Even if it's temporary during one exhibition, which needs a bit more energy than than another exhibition, and why also this change doesn't have to be on the building. It can be somewhere else, and just try to compensate it. And there's not many museums I can see this. I mean, unfortunately, and I think that's a very important thing we need to address. And also, as I mentioned earlier, be honest about how much energy you need. I don't know how Julius Bicycle is calculating this. It's a question like the carbon footprint, it's one thing, but all the primer energy in the building itself, which has been built, or in the material, or it's a very complex question. And that's something, I don't know, I think we have to be a bit more aware where we use energy and how we use energy everywhere. And I think by this awareness, and I think we're far away from feeling it, I mean, the white cube is actually black outside and full of oil, basically. Yeah? So if the oil and gas and fossil energy tap would be closed, we would, not just the cultural sector, the whole world would basically not be able to survive. And in a way harder than the COVID pandemic is hitting us in a minute. So we're so addicted basically to this kind of comfort. Yeah, and like Tino Segara said, it hurts, but it hurts every day if we want to stop using this oil. So I think the biggest problem is not just the change we need to do. Our biggest problem is time. We really run out of time. And I think that's something, yeah, do it now. We have to start now.
But I think maybe just to end on a bit more of a positive note, I think exactly what you're doing is making those kind of like changing the LED light bulbs fun. And I mean, I think when you first started talking to me about performance electrics in Kunststrom, it was this just wild idea that you would walk into a gallery space or you'd walk into the museum and the Pablo Wendell or the performance electrics would be the energy in the room, would be the light, you know, and that would be the artwork. And I think that's kind of the greatest metaphor for art there is, this energy you feel of this art moment, this kind of visceral thing that's going on that you don't really understand. And I think that's how to make it sexy and exciting, you know, to just to like turn it on, I guess.
Yeah, and empower people to, I mean, I think we need the small and the bigger actions, the decisions on a political higher level and on a very small institutional scale. We need top, bottom, and the other way around. Just because a last question, I think that's probably the last question I can throw into this discussion is just posted here, starting to work on the consequences of climate catastrophe with young art students or students. There is always the possibility that the topic is conceived as emotionally demanding or even overwhelming. How to deal with feelings of helplessness, etc. How to turn anxiety into creativity, keeping in mind that climate anxiety is also a phenomenon of privilege. I'm not sure if anybody of you is in the position to answer this super tricky question. Yes, Alexei, please.
Because we teach the topic, we teach sustainable creative practices in an art school with Janina. In Moscow, yes. And we meet this question every time. And we have students that don't want to look in this direction. They want to go into, as it was said, their personal creativity rather than researching what the climate changes problems are. But we might not have direct question, but answer. But my idea is that you can fight it with creativity. You can work on a project, maybe it's very, very small project, but what personally you can do as a creative person, what can do around these challenges, these problems. And then you go into it, you got involved and you see that it might change something. That's the solution, the solution that I see as a teacher. And I hope it works. Actually, I know that there are some of our students at the moment present here in the audience, and I don't know, you might give some response if it works or not. But I hope it does.
I think this also refers to the art museums. We also have to work on the narrative. You know, it's not about only thinking about the LED lighting, but also to use the power of communicating a subject and presenting this creativity.
Yes. Thank you all for your comments, answers. I think it's about time that we get a little bit of breath, stand up and activate ourselves, because we've listened to all of you very, attentive. Thanks. Okay. As you've seen and noticed during the talk, during the discussions, we had some non-human entities, other living entities with us. And Benoit, it's your turn. And we invite you all, of course, to join us and to put your camera on.
That's really beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for this nice collection. I think we have a very, very spread exhibition now, with all these objects coming from all your places. I leave you the floor to the team. I don't know who's gonna take more, and I share the screenshot with you, so you have the souvenir.
Did you get the screenshot, Benoit?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks all for joining for our Zoom experiment here. So Benoit will share the image that he just took, the screenshots, with you in the chat, and later on also on the Padlet. So you can see all these loved objects. And I mean, yes, it also very much refers, of course, to the one of our sections in the exhibition, Critical Zones. We don't live where we are, ghost acreages, to think about the project, the products or things you consume on a daily basis. So where do they come from? In which ways? From which people are they produced? In which circumstances? All these kind of questions that we tackle in the exhibition. And Daria, I think we'll go into the breakout rooms, right?
Yeah, probably I would also say one word, because I think that Andrea and Simone have already left because they needed to go. They excused themselves also before. And probably we can do here already a little wrap up before we go to the breakout session, because if somebody will leave, then it would be better probably to wrap up a bit also right now before we go to the breakout. Thank you so much, Janina and Alexei, Pablo and Helen and Graciela, and also from Phantasma if they are still there, but I don't see them. Thank you so much for joining us today, for making this possible, and for sharing your insights into how to activate yourself, how to rethink practices, and how to make exhibition making and artistic practices more sustainable. And I think I learned one thing, or like one big thing, from the panel, that also coming back to the question of the ecosystem that Graciela mentioned at the beginning, and it popped up somehow during also different during your presentations. That's probably the first step we need to make, the shift also to activate ourselves, just to rethink the relationships in the system where we are, not top down or down to top, but to think of it in order as an ecosystem, as a network, and where all nodes have their agency and can change things, can do little steps that probably lead to the change in the whole system. And I think what also popped up at some moment was decentralized power. I think it was with Helen and probably and Pablo, and I think this also needs somehow to, of course, to be transferred to the ecosystem, and that is something that powers this ecosystem and gives power to it. Also, the term or the notion of holistic was very important in different conversations and your answers. Probably also braveness to leave the comfort zone, but also inspiration through the practice, and inspiring examples are very, very useful. I don't know, Matthias, would you like to add something?
No, let's say I'm really happy with the result. It's not very precise and not very specific, but I think it's anyway a long way to go. We have to start at some point, and hopefully this was one of the little points to start with.
Yes, I mean, our assembly is not ended yet, so we invite you, of course, all to join the next panel. So tomorrow we will have a panel moderated by Stéphane Vellier-Bottero. It's called Museum as Shelter. And following that, we have a panel from my dear colleague, Barbara Kjolbasser, which is called Observatories for Earthly Education. Yes, and I'm looking very much forward to both of them. So all the information on the timings you'll find on our homepage. And Daria, would you like to give a question into the breakout rooms, or just leave it for a general exchange on the topic? I think that would be also fine.
Yeah, I think we can give one question, and then you can see whether you would like to pick it up or whether you would like to discuss something else. But the question would be, what little or big things I already do or have done in my practice as a cultural practitioner, as an artist, arts producer, or part of an institution to achieve some sustainability in my practice, or if not, what impedes me, what hinders me in these steps. It's lack of knowledge, of power, or of guidelines. So that's the question.
Thanks, Daria. And do we meet afterwards here again, or do we close with the breakouts?
I think we can, we have like 10 minutes for the breakout, and then we can meet again if you still have power
and energy.
And
okay.
Energy. If there are no questions or no pressing matters, I think somehow Graciela started to give examples of the work in the breakout session where we were, and probably if you don't mind, and Graciela could tell a bit more about these examples, this would be great.
Very briefly, I was asked about some work in Germany specifically, and I said that we are starting to work in Germany. We are developing a carbon footprint calculator for the cultural sector. I cannot say very much because it's really under development. We are looking at the music sector, working with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra, that then they are also promoting these conversations in the classical music sector. And what I was saying is that I think it's quite important maybe to build alliances with environmental movement. There is a fantastic event every year in Berlin, that is the Berlin Energy Transition. It's an international event, but at the end of it, there is a lot about innovation in Germany in energy, environment, and technology. And I think it needs those people that start bridging maybe the cultural sector as well, and bringing all that into that conversation, no? Just to make it more of a join up movement. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go now.
Yeah. I think we need another conversation with you.
Dog and family are calling me now.
Yes. Sure. Thank you so much for being with us. It was really an enjoyable conversation, and again, that was great. And I hope we will continue at some point where we stopped with you.
No, definitely. This has been great about the pandemic, really, that the level of connectivity that you wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. Yeah. Something is coming out of it. Okay, thank you. Great to see you all.
Bye-bye, Graciela.
Bye.
So, Daria, what do you think? Should we wrap up?
Yes.
It's been very long. No, but thank you all for joining into our conversation. And I think I can speak for the rest of the assembly team that we are looking forward to the day to come, and the discussions and the guests that are invited. I don't know, Barbara, do you want to give a quick view on what can be expected from your panel?
Yes, sure. It's first very quick. Also, thank you to Pablo and Helen, because I was in the breakout session with them and with Vincent and with Victoria and someone else. It was super nice conversation. So thank you very much for that. And tomorrow the panel on education will really focus on speaking from a point of view of art education, also what kind of education do we need in order to become terrestrial, and what would a permacircular education look like? So who can we learn from, and who do we have to learn with? What do we need to unlearn? And it's really nice because we have someone from Hawaii, an indigenous elder. I have a lovely co-host from New York, Alessandra Pomarico. There is Marion, who was here in the conversation a little bit earlier, from Dakar. There's the Floating University from Berlin. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone, because it's just, I'm really looking forward to having these people in one panel together. So please join. I think it's going to be a really nice conversation. I can't believe they're all meeting tomorrow. 17 hours time difference in one panel. So it's going to be quite impressive. Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. And also Stefan, but I don't know if he's still with us. If there's no open questions left, then I will just say goodbye to you all. Have a good evening, get a good rest, and yeah, maybe see you tomorrow.